Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session on my declassified Caribbean. And that's what I should have said, declassified Caribbean. What am I gonna call you guys? But let's head right into the topic this afternoon. And today we're looking at they're using the war on Iran to collapse the US dollar. That I think that they're doing. Everyone is watching the war on Iran. Missiles, headlines, rising tension. But what if that's not the real story? What if while the world is distracted, something much bigger is happening behind the scenes? Something that could affect every country, every economy, and every dollar in your pocket. Because right now, there are signs that the US dollar may not be stable as we think. And what if it should collapse? What would that mean for the Caribbean, the world economy, and our pockets, most importantly, our survival? And if history has taught us anything, major wars don't just change borders, they change money, they change power, they change who controls the world economy. So here's the real question. Are we just witnessing another geopolitical conflict, or are we watching the early stages of a shift away from the US dollar itself? Because for decades, the dollar has been the backbone of global trade, oil, imports, debt, even Caribbean economies depend on it. But now, countries are making moves, alliances are shifting, and some are quietly preparing for a world where the dollar is no longer king. And we've spoken about the whole matter of a digital economy, right? A digitized economy, which is what they are leading us toward at the moment. And if that's true, then this war isn't just about Iran. It's not just the United States against Iran or Iran against the United States. Could the global elites be working together to forge a new world order, a new world economic order that places all of us at the base while, of course, concentrating their power? Now, we've seen the 2008 financial collapse that the Western world, witnessed and how the concentration of powers happened there. I am going to show you a video which this guy has made, which is really creating, a lot of shockwaves, sending a lot of shockwaves across the internet, across YouTube. Lots of people are watching it, and what he says has a lot of weight, lot of substance, and we should listen to it and learn from. So we'll watch it and discuss some of what he has in the content. Okay, so let me share my screen with you at the moment and let's head into this very important video. Make sure that you like and you're sharing and you are subscribing to the channel. Very important that you do that because we want the channel to grow and for many people to be alert and to be vigilant as to what is happening in the world. So let's go. Kelly.
Okay, so just recently, the President of the United States gave a speech, and a lot of people were looking forward to hopefully the announcement of the end of the war. But that's not what ended up happening.
President Trump warning Iran the entire country could be taken out if they do not make a deal.
Every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. I mean, complete demolition.
In the middle of that speech, the stock market futures dropped. Oil went up even more than before, and Bitcoin went down. And it's all because the Strait of Hormuz, the most important oil choke points on Earth, responsible for 20 million barrels a day, is still closed. We know it's closed because of the most important chart you can look at today, which is this one. It shows total tanker transit calls, which are still down. Now, some people believe that if this strait stays closed for another 2 to 3 weeks, which is virtually guaranteed at this point, based on what the president is saying, the global economy will then reach a breaking point where even if the war stops, it might be too late. And it would start a crisis all around the world. And there's a theory that this crisis was planned as a way to bring about a major change to the world and the monetary system. That's because every crisis has always been an opportunity.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity.
Here we are now with an economy in crisis, but with an incredible opportunity.
It's certainly a major crisis, but it also offers us a unique opportunity.
Unprecedented opportunity to rethink and reset.
The great opportunity for reset.
Opportunity for us to reset.
For a reset.
The president says, in part, quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will."
Now, what's interesting is that if you look throughout history, every single time there has been a crisis, the end result was more centralization of wealth and power. And here's a few examples. In 2008, the financial system almost collapsed. And within weeks, the Fed invents quantitative easing, where they buy trillions in assets and bail themselves out. In 2020, the global pandemic shuts down the world, and we're told to stay home. And within a few months, governments all around the world are talking about something called the Great Reset. Klaus Schwab, who's the founder of the World Economic Forum, publicly states that the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. Right? COVID was the crisis, and the opportunity was global coordination of everyone's economies and currencies and centralized governments.
Your Royal Highness, these distinguished heads of state and government, the future is built by us, by a powerful community as
There's a pattern throughout history. Every single time there's been a crisis, there was an opportunity for central planners to change how the world worked. Now, I'm not saying that there's some shadowy room somewhere where there's 12 people. I don't think that's how it works, but what I am saying is that when there's a crisis, whether it's real or not, the people that are closest to power, who saw it coming, have always used it as an opportunity to upgrade the system in a way that centralized power. So the question that I want to explore in this video is, what is the next crisis? And what is the opportunity to centralize more power? With that said, let's get into it.
Okay, so that is something. Let me turn off this thing here.
Show me her convertible.
That is something that is
Sweetie,
amazing
you know,
when we think about what they're doing in terms of the centralization, of power, right? And the consolidation of power. That's exactly what
I'm
they're doing.
Jake. Hope you're doing well.
Something is happening here. Let me stop it here. Yeah, so we are seeing,
For the finance, and
we're
speak to
seeing,
the next once in a millennial lifetime
let
event.
me get it on.
All right, so I'm going to spend most of this video explaining the next.
Right. So we're seeing that the powers that be, they create a crisis and then they make laws around that crisis that concentrate power in the hands of a few. And the whole matter of the fact of the US dollar collapsing is going to reset the global economy, as it were. And he went into that, and he's talking about what if they should privatize US debt and corporations should control it. And then they should digitize the economy and then use our phones, just like they do in China, because, money is digitized for the most part. Many people use their WeChat and their phones to access money and to do business transactions in China. And you have a credit score system there. And the fact is that if you don't agree with the system, then the system will not permit you to withdraw any funds, any monetary, funds from the bank. And also, if we do not agree, for example, what if they decide that they are going to, privatize, of course, the US debt, and then have us pay it, where we would normally pay it, but have the entire world pay US debt. Then if people decide that they, decide to dissent, then their funds can be withheld from the bank. Because if you are in a digital economy, it means for that cash is not king. I've been telling you that based on my understanding, my reading of history, that's exactly what they're seeking to do. That they're seeking to collapse the economy, collapse the dollar, It's an engineered collapse, by the way. This is something that they have been working on for years. And I thought that they are quite nearer to it since COVID pandemic than we think. When they shut down the economy, that's exactly what they were trying to do, to re-engineer. And if you listen to what Klaus Schwab said, he was mentioning the fact that, this world is run by us, by the power group. That's what he said. It's not run by people. So if you think that you are living in democracies and you control what your governments do around the world, you need to wake up, because he was very, very clear. And he wrote a book during the pandemic on the Great Reset, which I encourage all of you to read. Very boring and dense. But the fact of the matter is that he clearly outlines his vision, dark though it may be, for the world. And these guys are not playing, by the way. You have to understand that these guys are just not playing. They mean power by any means necessary. So if they have to create slaughter where the hundreds of thousands of millions of people die, then they don't care. And what is interesting to me, watching a video the other day, was, this podcaster was suggesting that it was interesting how people, when Trump said that he was going to go to Iran and, just wipe out a civilization, that what did we do? We just sat there looking. So what's going to happen to us when it's our time for Trump to wipe out the entire population? What's going to happen to us? What's going to happen to us when he says that he's going to wipe us out? Now, it leads us to understand that there is going to be a mark of the beast. And the mark of the beast foundation is being laid right now as we speak. There is an economic component. We're not going to be able to buy or sell. That is what they're doing. So when they digitize the economy, they can surveil us. We cannot do what they don't want us to do. We cannot dissent. We cannot protest against government policies. That's exactly what they're doing. And the pandemic was used as an infrastructure to adapt us to what the future is going to be. Now, the pandemic was just something light in comparison to what is ahead, in comparison to what lies ahead. That is what we have to understand. So if they can control us, then we're forced, at least. We don't have to do it, but many people would be forced to do it, as during the pandemic. You couldn't eat, right? You could not go to the supermarket. You could not access, anything that you wanted to do for survival. So the fact of the matter, most people will just cave in and say, I'm just going to do it. Right? Many people, of those of us who think that we know that we're not going to accept the mark of the beast, it's not that easy for us to say that it's not going to happen. By the help of God, we won't. But the fact of the matter is that many of us are going to respond to the fear and the doom and the hunger, the starvation, the famine, because they can also create famine. He's suggesting too that they might have an energy lockdown where they're telling us that we're in crisis, so we have to, not consume, but we have to economize on our consumption of gas and energy. So what if they lock us down another time for several months because of what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz? So we have to look beyond that there's a war between Iran and the United States. We have to see how they are reorientating the global financial structure, the global economic structure, and the political system by extension. So what we're saying here is not that the global elites are not in flux, they're not in conflict, they are having conflict because some of them want their ideology to rule the world. They want to be at the helm. And remember now, the global elites are not, they are just not we think that they're just one identifiable people. They're not. They have their, racial, they have their ethnic, they have their religious differences. We must understand that. And so we can't group them into one box thinking that these people are all similar. They have their conflicts, but we can't also think that they are working on our behalf. They're not. So while they are bickering, and we are the ones who need to look beyond what they're doing and try to say that we're not, all these wars are not our wars, they are your wars, and Iran is not going to free us. Neither is the United States of America, neither any country. because you have African global elites too, right? They form a part of the global elites. So let's not say that we're Black and Caribbean and think that our elites are better than the United States elites or the Iranian elites. They're not better, right? They are bickering because they want to be able to be in charge. And they're guys, the elites that they share similar ideologies and values. Okay, so let's watch it. Be very careful of siding with any of these world powers and global elites or domestic elites, because we are the ones who are going to suffer. And they're the ones who are setting the rules. And we saw during the pandemic that all of them came together and they did one thing. And immediately after the pandemic, we saw that there was a war in the Ukraine against Russia, or vice versa, Russia against Ukraine. And then eventually we saw what happened, in Palestine. So they are reordering, reimagining, as Carl Schwarz, is it Carl? Schwab is I forgot his name now. Klaus Schwab suggested. They're actually reimagining the world, but they're not reimagining it in our likeness, in their likeness, after their kind, that they want us to worship them. Literally, that's what they're setting up, a religio, political, economic order, because that's going to be the mark of the beast. It's not only having to do with economics, it has to do with political. And they say to worship the beast. Whomever does not worship the beast, because that is what is going to eventually caught down too. And people, when they're suffering, when there's no money in their pocketbooks, they will be tempted to submit to a power, to kneel to that power, to do whatever that power requires that they do. So if that power requires, and it will, that they worship the system, because this is not only a man, this is a religio-political economic system. And we often forget the economics because people control us by what we can do with our monies or what we aren't able to do. Okay? And if they set up that digital economy, which we should be against, then we can know that we are much nearer to the mark of the beast and to the control of the entire world. And that is what they are building up to. But the fact of the matter is that they might decide, because the United States is now almost $40 trillion in debt, they might decide that this is not going to be possible to be paid off. So you know what happened? We are going to privatize the debt, give it to BlackRock or one of these top major corporations, and then they will have to now decide to, and make the entire world pay this debt. And we'll have to pay it, through what laws BlackRock or any of these corporations will be setting and forcing our prime ministers around the world to obey. And already we're seeing where they're using national security as a major pretext for US control. The United States is suggesting to the world that the entire world is really an enemy to it, and it needs to protect its rights. It needs to protect its shores, its borders, its people. That is what it's suggesting. And it sounds plausible from a superficial level. But if you understand history, if you particular political history, then you understand that the United States is not trying to protect its citizens. You must also understand religious history, because that is how the Vatican is going to play its part in this final showdown. Okay, and this showdown is really wrapping up. It's a showdown between liberty and slavery. That is what we are moving back to. And they are reimagining the world. The New World Order is no New World Order. It's an old order, but an order that is modernized according to our modern standards, technologies that they have at their hands now to control us even more. But this order was always been. If you read what happened during the Dark Ages in Europe, then you'll see that there is nothing new under the sun. We have to read what happened during the Spanish Inquisition, what happened during the Third Reich, what happened during the Spanish Civil War that was between 1936 to 1939, right there in Spain. And what were what was the conflict about? And then you are going to understand that it was always about global power and control. Okay? And I'm reading some sources, and I perhaps will make a video, maybe a live on it, on Epstein and his connections to the Vatican. Epstein and his connection to the Vatican. You know, the Vatican is, of course, negating it. That's what they do. Right? And, you know, the Bannon guy, what's it, Steve Bannon, and Epstein, before he died and before he was imprisoned, were actually planning to dethrone, they were, you know, conniving, as they said, I'm not sure if it's real or it's not real, to unseat Pope Francis when he was alive. And could it be that because they were plotting to do that, right, which you do not do, you don't do to a reigning pope, because a pope has so much intelligence and boots on the ground that they will get you back, right? So is it because now that, you know, Epstein was going after the Vatican and Vatican Bank and the Pope because they had differences in terms of their ideology for world domination and control? Is that the main reason why they actually got him off the stage, of the scene? And now they're doing, they're bombarding us with daily, you know, salacious reports of what he did and who was involved with what. That is not, you know, as horrific as that those stories are, and they are in fact horrific and salacious. We must understand that all of this discourse is much bigger than it is, and what we're seeing is just at the surface level, because there are deeper meanings and implications for all of us, for all of us. And many of our world elites are involved in child trafficking. It's not only Epstein. You'll be shocked. You would be shocked. And there was a gentleman in the United States, I forgot the name of the book, Nick something, he wrote a book on child trafficking in the United States. And right now, as we speak, and for those of you who are connected to the Catholic Church, you have to be careful. You've got to be careful, particularly with your children, if you do have children, okay? Because that church is something else, and it knows how to hide whatever it does, and you are not going to be able to fight that powerful machinery. You are not able, as we're seeing with, you know, Epstein and the likes of all the people who have gone up against the Pope, the Roman Pontiff. Okay? Got to be able to understand that. And this is not just because you are religious. You don't have to be religious to understand religious history and how this religious political institution of the Roman Catholic papacy, how she controls the world. You just don't have to be. It is the smallest state in the world. Can you imagine? Less than, or fewer than, I should say, let me get my English language together, fewer than 1,000 people live in a small state that controls so much of what happens in the world. That is unthinkable, right? That a small city, Vatican City, right? Of, I can't remember the exact size, but it's a very small city, inconsequential, if she had not created a massive, gigantic system of control. And it's religious, political, economic. Do you know that the Vatican Bank has never been and cannot be assessed, audited? That's the word I was looking for. Cannot be audited. It's not allowed. Because of the secrecy, we do not even know the wealth of the Vatican, but is wealthier than all nations combined, including the United States of America. So who do you think is running the show? Who do you think is behind the war in Iran? Do you think the Vatican has always loved the United States? In fact, when the United States was founded, the Vatican clearly said that all of these touted human rights and, you know, talking about the separation of church and state and religious liberty, that is anathema to what the Roman Catholic Church believed, and that she was going to destroy it. Right? So the Vatican has been working, the Roman Catholic papacy has been working on destroying the United States for years. And just read the book, 50 Years in the Church of Rome by Chenique. I think it was Charles Chenique. And you will study that and how the Vatican from day one talk about. Also, there's another book that was written, they talk about, the title of the book, sorry, was wow, I'm forgetting the name of that book about something about the dark days. Well, can't remember the name of the book at this moment. But that book also is very, very important, and I will try to probably, put it in my description. Okay, so you can read it and read that book. But from day one, the U.S., the United States of America, okay, was um, trying, well, the Vatican was working to destroy the fabric of that um, freedom and that institution, that political experiment, because the United States is an experiment. Right? We think that the United States and whole, all that they should have done that, and they said that in the Constitution. But everything, the Constitution, the United States Constitution, was and remains an experiment. In fact, if you read the history of the United States correctly, the founding fathers never thought it would have lasted. They just was doing, just like an experiment, a scientific experiment. You're trying something because that's never happened. Where you're talking about freedom of all peoples. Never in the history of the world, except for the Jews when they were under theocracy, when God controlled them. Okay? But apart from that, outside of that, you've never had a state which said that all its citizens were equal. And you shouldn't have a king. Because once you have a king, then you'll have subjects. The United States says that it's what? It's a church without a pope and a nation without a king. That is in essence what the United States is about. No theocracy. But no sooner had they been formed, slavery became a part of the core institution in the United States, which slavery would have to involve some king or kingship. Right? And that is what the United States, fell to. Because again, we experiment with things. It doesn't mean, therefore, that we're going to live up to the principles of our experimentation. But thanks be to God, the Constitution had been written, and eventually there are people who presented and held the United States up to its core principles of human dignity and equality. Have they reached the goal? No, and perhaps will never. Because once you live in human society with all our human imperfections, you'll never reach that level of perfection. Never. Right? But the thing about it is that when we look now at the US dollar and how fragile it is becoming because of debt, we can't just ignore that. We can't war ourselves into freedom. We can't war ourselves into having, a stable economy. It's not going to happen. And that is what we're seeing now. And some of us are to be blamed too, because our lifestyle, the life that we live, is unsustainable. And we are prodding them along. The more we buy their things too, all of these things that we have to have, all of these things that are supporting some of the war efforts, then even our chat GPTs and things that we're forced to buy are helping to build up these war efforts, which are eventually killing us and killing our economies. So we have to wake up. We have to wake up. What if the US should fall tomorrow? It's not going to fall in the sense that it's going to come down and the United States is going to be history. But its dollar can come down. And the elites of the world, they know that it's on the verge of collapse. The US dollar is on the verge of a total collapse. And what they're trying to do now, they're trying to save, to take out their investments, just like 9/11, when, after 9/11, before the incident that people, the rich, the United States elites and other global elites took out their stocks and made sure that they did not fall and that they didn't have to suffer grave losses that we, the citizens, had to foot and had to experience. Okay, so I'm encouraging you now, as citizens of the Caribbean and the world, those of you who are listening to me from all parts of the world, hopefully the video will be sent to all parts of the world, that you will come to grips with the realities that there is going to be a mark of the beast. And once we talk about the mark of the beast, we cannot take out religion. I don't care if you are religious or not. If we talk about the mark of the beast, even secular people understand that religion is going to form the core of the mark of the beast. But it has an economic component. They can't tell you now because you would be offended if somebody asks you to worship them. Okay, so what they have to do is to strip you of your freedoms, as the slaves were stripped. Remember, when the slaves were slaves, they were chattel. That's what they told them. So whatever their masters told them to do, they literally were worshiping their masters, their slave masters. Whatever massa told them to do, they had to do. Not because they wanted to do it, but because they had stripped them of their economic rights, of their economic privileges, right? And they just had no other way but to do what Massa told them to do. That's the direction in which we're heading. We'll be stripped of our economic rights, social rights and privileges, right? And thus, we are going to wind up without any rights at all. Because power, absolute power, is what craves for worship, for adoration. And that is the ultimate goal of the global elites. So get your acts together and start to share the video so that people can be alert to what is happening in the world. Because for decades, the dollar has been the backbone of global trade, oil, imports, and debt. Even Caribbean depend on it. But now, countries are making moves, alliances are shifting, and some are quietly preparing for a world where the dollar is no longer king. Very important. And if that's true, then this war isn't just about Iran. It could be part of a much larger transformation, one that most people won't see coming until it's too late. So let's break this down, get ourselves prepared for a collapse of the US dollar and a transformation and a reimagination of the global economy, which is going to send shock waves across the entire world. Are you ready? Thank you for joining.